I'm back from Denver. Baseball is all we got, and that's okay. I'm fired up for the second half. My Mets are suddenly a real baseball team. I know it's temporary because it's the Mets, but that's fine. We have with us here on the Adam Gold Show the manager of the Durham Bulls, and before we get into everything, Morgan Ensberg is joining us, and you and I may have discussed this before. In other sports, it's coach, head coach, but in baseball, and the only sport I ever played growing up competitively was baseball, and I always used to call my manager, although he was a high school coach, Skip. What do you prefer? Is it Skip? It's not coach, is it?
It's 100% not coach. Coach is high school, college, amateur, unless, you just call pro people by their first name,
right?
Or Skip, like Skip, like that. Or if you have just your nickname, whatever your nickname might.
Right.
Mo is a nickname, and then in Spanish, Vikingo, which is Viking in Spanish because I'm Norwegian.
That's right. I remember the last time we spoke, we ended up talking about Vikings. It's so funny.
That's right. We always try to move it towards Vikings.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Do you have a Viking hat? Do you have a helmet?
Yeah, we had a helmet last year for a home run celebration. I did not bring it this year, but I will tell you a little fact is after a guy hits a home run, the bullpen looks at me and I at them, and we put up kind of like the hang loose sign on both your fingers, like it looks like bull horns.
Right.
Those are Viking horns. I've been doing that for 5 years. So it's like a Viking helmet.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, fun.
Absolutely beautiful. By the way, speaking of beautiful, long series starting tonight with the Gwinnett. I guess they're the Stripers, right? Yeah. We got a 6-game series, including Christmas in July coming up in a few days. There's fireworks. You guys are a few games under 500 in the second half. Talk to me about where you guys are right now, and then we'll get into some other things.
Yeah, look. We have good players. The thing with AAA is that you have people that go up to the big leagues, come back down, go up and come down, and so it's always kind of just a mix mash of players. And when I say that, what I mean is sometimes you're trying to put players in positions they're not as commonly used to,
right? Because
that's the nature. It's not a function of their ability. It's just, hey, man, we got to get this guy over here because somebody got called up,
right?
Or we had 2 or 3 major injuries where guys, Caminero and Basabe, you guys,
yeah,
these are 40-man players that are very good players are out for 4 and 6 weeks. So again, I don't want this to sound like excuses so much as I'm trying to describe the inconsistent roster and stuff. And so the fact that we're somewhere around 500, I think is actually it's really telling of just how talented they are. But no, we're gonna continue working, continue to get better.
Morgan Ensberg, Skip, manager of the Durham Bulls, is joining us. It all starts tonight, a 6-game series with the Gwinnett Stripers. We're just coming off the All-Star breaks everywhere. And I was curious, you and I spoke, I don't know, a few months ago. You were an All-Star, 2005. What was that experience like for you? Because we see a lot of first-time All-Stars, and I thought watching, especially Home Run Derby, which is such a fun event, and even the guys who are not involved in Home Run Derby, they're just in awe of everything that's going on, and they're meeting their heroes. So what was your All-Star experience like?
I think that it was fun, right? It was great that you're around those guys. I always listen. I walked into that room and I kind of looking around and finding my locker. It's next to John Smoltz's locker, which is ironically when people ask me who's the person that you don't want, the toughest pitcher you've ever faced, and before they get the sentence off, I say John Smoltz. So I'm, and I walk into the room and I'm like, what the heck am I doing in here? You're seeing these guys that are really good, man. I mean, really consistently good over time. But the experience itself is fun. If we pull back the curtain, it's a long day, right? Like there's a lot. These guys, there's a whole room that has so much memorabilia and baseballs that each player signs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's fun. They make it fun, but it's also kind of a work day. But no, it's great. You get to talk to other guys, and then you make a kind of a small connection, really for the rest of your career, right? Like on both sides, right? You kind of nod over, and you're like, oh yeah, we saw each other at the All-Star game, stuff like that. So it's a fun experience.
Morgan Ensberg is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. I remember a time where the National League always won. That was back during my youth. Nowadays, it seems like the American League always wins. Does that, I don't know how, like when you played, you were in the National League, when you were in the All-Star game, Houston was still in the National League. I remember that. It's still hard for me to kind of figure out that Houston's in the National League and Milwaukee's or in the American League and Milwaukee's in the National League. I don't really, it's hard for me to deal with that. But what do you make of one league dominating right now? The American League has essentially dominated this game for the last 2 decades.
I think this is a great lesson in probability, right? Like this is an excellent lesson in probability. This is also an excellent lesson in roulette, right?
Yes.
So essentially you have equal ability on both sides. Nobody disputes whether or not one team might have the slightest, and I'm talking slightest of edge if you look at it from a WAR standpoint or something. But generally speaking, these are two balanced teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way baseball works is over time, over many, many reps, the best team will win and get to the playoffs. That does not mean that the best team will win the World Series, but when you look at a 162-game season, the best team will rise to the top. In any one game, who knows? You have two equally talented teams. I would even tell you that if a really good college team, played, a high A team or a double A team, they might catch absolute fire. I'm talking absolute fire because pro is different, but they could potentially catch absolute fire and, beat them.
No, we saw it last year. Texas was clearly not the best team in the American League during the course of the season, and they won the World Series. It's just when you get to the playoffs. Yeah, when you get to the playoffs. Whoever plays better is going to win. It's why we've seen so many teams go from the wild card game, back when there was just one wild card game, go from that to win the World Series.
Yeah, I believe that the most dangerous teams, there's two of the most dangerous teams are the wild card winners, right?
Yeah.
Because the wild cards have been in the fire since April 1st.
Yep.
And I'm talking in the fire. So by the time they get to the playoffs, you're talking about bulldogs. Like these guys, our teams in Houston, when we were going to the playoffs and stuff, we had the Cardinals who would usually won the division, and then we would be playing. But, anytime we played against each other, it was a knockdown drag-out. But we were used to fighting from the beginning. In fact, that World Series year, we started out 15-30. So, we're very much ready for, pressure.
Morgan Ensberg, Durham Bulls manager, is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. Baseball, I saw this statistic, and the percentage is irrelevant. But attendance is up. Television ratings are way up, which, especially for the All-Star game, which is still the number one All-Star game among all sports. Football doesn't even have one anymore because it's the one that most resembles the actual game. The others are really, farcical versions of it. What do you make of the increase in popularity right now with baseball without Caitlin Clark isn't even playing, and more people are watching and all of that? So what do you make? What do you attribute this to?
Man, do we get a ricochet, like some shrapnel off? Clark, good night. Like, that's incredible. I think it's probably a few factors, and I've got one at the end that I'll tell you that I think is kind of the wild card, perhaps. But one, I think just in terms of social media, I think that more people are just seeing images. You don't necessarily, according to perhaps these algorithms, like you see things that you're interested in, but then it kind of chooses what you see. So perhaps you're seeing, the masses, perhaps due to an algorithm, are seeing more. Perhaps the marketing is better there. But I would also say that, whatever people's opinions are on youth baseball,
Right.
it just seems like a lot of the marketing in this travel ball is that, Joe Schmo, who got to the big leagues, played for us. And there's just so much baseball now being played around, like, year-round, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
when I was growing up, when you were growing up, I wanted to get off the baseball field as we started approaching, July.
Yep.
I'm like, this is killing me. I want to go to the beach. I want to start surfing and skateboarding again. And then when the fall came, it was soccer or football, right? And winter came, it was basketball. But now they're playing year-round. And so I think that it's just more front of the mind. I think it has become a more popular sport. And certainly when I look at the younger kids, and I'm talking about kids that are under 15, it's largely dominated with baseball. I mean, it's baseball. It's very much an undercurrent.
Interesting. I also, when my son is kind of consumes everything through social media, and I know
Yep.
he sees a lot of like Ellie De La Cruz highlights and players like this, and the game is getting younger and more athletic and more palatable. And I grew up in a time where the speed portion of the game was so much more prevalent than it is today, although it's coming back with the new rules. So
Right.
with the ability to, the incentive, I guess, to steal bases. They've made it so much easier to steal bases. And I think there's nothing more exciting. A triple or a stolen. I love that element of the game, even though I grew up a Met fan, and I despise the Cardinals. The only team in baseball. I don't even hate the Yankees as much as I hate the Cardinals. But man,
Right.
that era of Cardinal baseball where they were stealing thousands of bases every year that was one of the most enjoyable teams to watch. I was a fan of the Expos and Tim Raines, one of my favorite players. So I love a good stolen base.
And you know what? Players love stolen bases, right? Like, I mean, it's fun to steal a base. I think, look, you were mentioning your son again with social media and so forth, and I think this is all part of it. And then they're seeing, players, clips of players doing things that are exciting. Well, that's something that's exciting,
Yeah.
And people, unless you go to the game or something, or it's hard. You're like, could I get excited by a stolen base? You're like, that doesn't seem like something. And then you're sitting in the stands, and then the guy steals, and you're like, oh my gosh, he's going.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be exciting. I think that the marketing of the uniforms, right?
Yes.
Like, I think that was a really, really good idea. Just how they have kind of some alternate uniforms, and again, it's just, I think that they're having more eyes on them.